English Civil War. I've realised as I sort of played the intro that I've kind of given away what happens, because the title for today's lesson is Crown Down, the King Loses. So it's kind of a bit of a, if you didn't already know, a bit of a cliffhanger that King Charles loses. So today we're going to look a little bit more at the battle and how he loses, and then what we do with him at the end. You know, what should happen to the king? Was he guilty of any crime because he wouldn't listen to Parliament? And he was arresting MPs he thought were plotting against him. You know, what do we do? So that's what we're going to look at today. And apologies if you didn't know that the king and the Cavaliers, as we looked at last week, lost. I've given away the finish to the story. Welcome to everybody I can see. Hello to everybody in the chat over on Facebook. Hello to everybody on YouTube. Everyone watching on catch up. I know quite a few of you are watching on catch up because of the lovely weather. And let's get started. So I'm going to start with a riddle. So the riddle says, I fought without lifting a sword or gun. I had no crown, but made the king run. I spoke through laws, not through might, and claimed I stood for England's right. I sat in London, old but bold. My words were worth more than gold. So what do we think that our answer to our riddle is? So I fought without lifting a sword or a gun. That's tricky. How can you fight if you don't lift a weapon in a war? They had no crown, but made the king run. I spoke through laws, not through might, and claimed I stood for England's right, which kind of means for what was right in the world. I sat in London, old but bold. My words were worth much more than gold. Tricky, isn't it? What do we think the answer might be? Now, it's a bit tricky, isn't it? Now, it can't be Oliver Cromwell, who was the leader of the parliamentarians. Some of you mentioned him last week, but because it says that they fought without lifting a sword and a gun, and obviously Oliver Cromwell definitely did that, so it can't be Oliver Cromwell. I sat in London. Shall we have a drum roll? I will tell you the answer. I think some of you have got it. It's Parliament. So well done if you got that right. Well done if you didn't get it right but had a really good try. So we're going to start by having a bit of a recap about what we know. Last week we were looking at the Cavaliers that fought for the king, and then we have the parliamentarians and they fought for Parliament. And we talked a little bit about how they're a bit stereotypical, the way they're shown in some history books, that probably they looked much of a muchness. So we're going to have a little bit of fun to start us off. We're going to play a true false game. And so the first true or false question is, some soldiers paid for their armour themselves. Now that's a bit odd, isn't it? If you're going to go and fight for your king, or you're going to go and fight for Parliament, surely you don't have to pay for your own armour. I mean, that sounds a little bit far-fetched, do we think? Or do you think that actually, no, that sounds pretty reasonable? What do we think? Do we think it's true, or do we think it's false? Now, some of you might have been listening really closely last week, because it absolutely is true. Not everyone was given equipment. We looked at this last week, this idea that, you know, you're going to have these very different types of soldier. Many soldiers bought their own swords or helmets or breastplates and armour if they wanted better protection. And lots of people just turned up with kind of what they had. So quite different to what we kind of think. Horses were sometimes given beer to drink before battle. Well, not sure that sounds very healthy. I'm not sure I'd want to be on a horsey that are drinking drunken beer. Why might they, if that's true, why might they have done that? So do we think this is true, or do we think this is false? Now, I definitely wouldn't have get on a horse and ride a horse that had been given beer, if it is true. What do we think? Well, it's true. So some cavalry is the people that ride on horseback in a battle. Some cavalry officers believe that if they gave their horses a bit of ale or a bit of beer or wine, it might calm their nerves before the battle. But I certainly don't think I'd want a drunk horse in battle either. So they probably would have to be really careful about that. Parliament banned people from playing football during the war. So do we think Parliament said, right, everybody come and fight for us, and by the way, you can't play any football? That sounds very random. Do we think that's true, or do we think that's false? Now, let's have a think. Now, we talked last week, I know Jack talked last week a lot about that some of the parliamentarians were very, very strict Christians. And so this is true. So Parliament did say that people should stop wasting their time on games like football, and they should focus on behaving properly, fighting for what's right. And if they had any spare time, they should be focusing on prayer and certainly not wasting time playing football. So absolutely true. So well done those of you that spotted that was quite true. Now, if a soldier ran away from battle, which is known as desertion, he was punished, always punished, with death. So what do we think? This comes up quite a lot in various wars, this concept of desertion, because people, if they ran away, they might run away because they were frightened. They might run away because they were scared of dying. They might run away because they kind of changed their mind and didn't want to be a soldier anymore. And it's called desertion. It happens in most wars, in fact, probably all wars. Where do you think they were all punished with death? Seems quite extreme, but it definitely did happen in lots of wars. World War I is a good example. That was definitely how it was punished. But what do we think for the English Civil War? Now, some people think that this is true because it is true in other wars, but in the English Civil War, it wasn't true. It was treated very seriously, but not everybody that deserted. Some of people that were deserted would have been put to death, but sometimes they might have been imprisoned. Sometimes they might have been whipped. Sometimes if they sort of came back and said they were sorry, they were just forgiven. So it wasn't a blanket punishment. Some soldiers were executed for desertion, but they were actually more thoughtful about, how maybe imprisoning or even forgiving some soldiers that had done it. Whereas in other wars, you desert and run away, it's instant death if you're caught. During the war, some towns switched sides more than once. Now, last week I said to you, go and find out who your town or village or city supported during the war, because it's sort of quite well documented. But do you think some towns switched sides more than once? So, most of the towns supported the king, and then after a while they then switched and maybe decided they were going to support Parliament. And then decided, no, actually we're going to switch. We're going to support the king. What do you reckon? That sounds a bit far-fetched, surely. Well, it's true. So some towns like Leicester, quite a few Oxfordshire towns took one side, were taken by one side, and then retaken by the other side. And so the people supported who was kind of controlling their town. So if the king took the town and was using it to front some of the battles, then they were visibly supporting the king. And then if Parliament won, then they would suddenly sort of swap sides. So people and towns switch sides more than once. Now, this is, I'm going to turn my camera off so you get a much better view. This is a timeline of lots of different events. So we have 1645, 1644, 1647, 1648, 1640, 1643, 1646, and 1642. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to sort these into chronological order. And when we say chronological order, we mean date order. So what comes first, what comes second, all the way through to what comes last. And read or get a grown-up to help you read what happens at each time. So this is sort of the chronological story of the war. So what order does it go in? Right, quite a few of you are working it out. I'm going to give you 1 more minute. If you finish, you could think, what's the turning point? When do you think it was a turning point that Parliament were definitely going to win? Right, now you can pause the video, or the live rather, but you can pause the video if you would like some more time. You absolutely can do that. And we're going to go through them and work out what the correct answers are. So the first one is 1640, and this is where it really starts to get a little bit messy and people start to get a little bit cross. This is when King Charles calls Parliament back after sending them home for 11 years. And he just calls them back because he wants really their ideas on how we can get some more money. And what he isn't expecting when Parliament arrive is for them to start arguing with him about control over the country, because they're saying they sort of had been at home for 11 years. He hadn't, he hadn't listened to them. He hadn't done what they'd wanted, which is to not tax the people unless it was a fair tax. And then as soon as they arrived back, he was expecting them to sort of be so happy to be back that they wouldn't argue with him. But instead they said, do you know what, we don't really think you should be controlling this country. We have big issues with it. So they have a big argument. And then in 1642, as we know, we've looked at this already, Charles tries to arrest some MPs in Parliament. So he enters Parliament, which is illegal. He's supposed to be invited. That's kind of the rules. It's supposed to be a safe place for all the MPs. And he marches into Parliament and he tries to arrest some MPs. Now, he doesn't manage it because they've already run away, but he raises his royal flag in Nottingham in August 1642. And this is deemed to be the sort of call to war that starts it all off. And by 1643, there's lots and lots of battles that occur across England. And really, those battles, some of them are won by Parliament, some of them are won by the King. What doesn't happen, which is what you possibly would expect, is that the King would have the better army and he would just crush all of the parliamentarian soldiers, everyone that's prepared to fight for Parliament, that he would just crush them, and that would be the end of that. But he doesn't. There are some battles where he loses, and it's not really a done deal. And then in 1644, this is a big turning point, because what Parliament does is they make a deal with Scotland. And what they get really from that deal is lots and lots of extra soldiers, because the Scottish don't like the king either. If you remember, he tried to push the English prayer book on them when they didn't want it. So then all of a sudden Parliament has far more in his, they have far more fighting for them. And then in 1645, Oliver Cromwell has trained up a lot of the parliamentarians. The reason that they probably hadn't done so well in the beginning was because they were just lots of random people in a big rabble. But by 1645, Oliver Cromwell, the leader of the parliamentarians, had made sure that the army was a well-trained army. It's often known as the New Model Army. And this is very obvious in what's known as the Battle of Naseby in 1645. Another really big turning point, because Parliament rock up, not with basically just a rabble of randoms that have decided to fight for Parliament, but an actual professional army. And what they do is they absolutely crush the king's forces, which means that by 1646, the king thinks there's no way I'm going to win. And so King Charles surrenders. In 1647, while Parliament are deciding what to do with him, he's secretly trying to make alliances to regain power. He angers the parliamentarians. He's held in the Isle of Wight, and he tries to escape. You can actually go to the Isle of Wight and see where he tried to escape, the window he tried to escape. And there is, in 1648, a few outbreaks with royalist supporters who try and cause some uprisings to kind of get the king back in charge. But it leads to nothing, really, with Parliament having won the English Civil War. So let's have a think about some of these big battles. The first big battle was known as the Battle of Edge Hill. Now we're going to imagine we're Parliament and start to think about some of the decisions that they made, which led them to win the English Civil War. So the first battle that was very big was the Battle of Edge Hill in 1642. And both sides turn up, and both sides have fairly similar numbers, but the Royalists have huge cavalry. And the cavalry is really strong. And what happens is they start charging at the Parliament army. So if you were in command of the Parliament army, what would you do? If you have a humongous cavalry, remember they're soldiers on horseback, you have mainly foot soldiers. What are you going to do? Are you going to order the cavalry that you do have to charge back at them? Are you going to tell your musketeers, so the people with those flintlock pistols, to fire volleys, which means to work together to have lots and lots of bullets firing at the horses? Or do you wait until the cavalry gets really close before deciding what to do? What do you think you would do in that situation? Now you've got less cavalry, so charging straight back, you could do that. Or would you tell your musketeers to organise themselves and get those shots firing at the horses? Or would you wait until the cavalry got closer and then sort of surprise and attack them back? What would you think you would do? What do you think you would do? Well, there's possibly evidence for all of them, but what they did, so well done if you've got this one right, they tell the musketeers to fire volleys to stop the horses. So the Royalist cavalry, they were led by Prince Rupert. They charged Parliament forces, but basically the Parliament's musketeers managed to fire lots and lots of counterattacks at them. And really this battle ends in a draw. It's not very decisive for either side. Now the second big battle is the Battle of Marston Moor in 1644. Parliament have joined forces with Scotland by this point. The Royalists are holed up in York. They're defending York. Parliament now have definitely more soldiers, but it's really bad weather. The royalists aren't expecting you to attack right away because you need to organise yourself. You don't really want to attack in bad weather. But what do? You're going to wait for better weather? Are you going to make a surprise attack because the royalists won't expect it? Or are you just going to send a messenger to demand surrender? What do you think you're going to do? So wait for better weather, surprise attack at sunset, or you're going to send a messenger to demand a surrender. I mean, surely it's worth a try. Well, I think lots of you have probably chosen the correct answer here. Again, you could do all three of those, but what the parliamentarians did was they made a surprise attack. The royalists were really not expecting it. It was in the evening. The weather was horrendous. Not really the sort of time you would mount a attack on somebody. But they won a huge victory, and this was really important because the royalists lose control over the north of England. Now, Battle 3, the Battle of Naseby, is 1645. This is where the parliamentarians rock up with their new model army. The royalists again are trying to shove the tactics of the cavalry charge at you. They're just literally pushing cavalry at you, trying to push you forward. But then at the same time, they come up with a really great technique, and their technique is to try and capture all your supplies and your wagons. So they send some cavalry towards you to charge, but they also try and capture and take away your supplies and all your wagons and everything that all your supplies and weapons are piled up on. So it's quite a good tactic from the king and the royalists. But what would you do? Would you chase the royal cavalry? Would you retreat and try and get your wagons away quickly? Or would you keep your soldiers steady and just hold the line and not be distracted? Because this is what they want you to do. Now, what would you do? Chase them? Because you don't really want to lose your supplies. Would you retreat and protect the supplies that they haven't captured, or would you hold steady and hold the line? What do you think you do? Tricky one. Now, this is the correct answer. It's to keep your soldiers steady and hold the line, which is really brave. So a lot of the royalist men ran after this big baggage train with all the supplies, and they didn't sort of run after them, because as soon as you weaken and you have, we've seen this with the Battle of Hastings, as soon as you have everybody just running in lots of different directions and not knowing what they're doing, it's a really bad idea. And so what they did was they held the line. They didn't get distracted by the royalists trying to take their stuff. And they remained steady, they held the line, they fought en masse, and as a result, they won. And the Battle of Naseby was a huge defeat for King Charles. Now, by the time we get to 1646, we have the Siege of Oxford. Oxford is King Charles's stronghold, but Parliament has surrounded it. Now, you hear on the grapevine that King Charles is going to try and secretly escape disguised as a servant. What are you going to do? So are you going to send people to watch the city gates so they can spot Charles trying to secretly escape? Are you going to just go for it and launch a big attack on the walls and make Oxford fall and win a final battle? Or are you going to try and make a peace deal? Are you going to actually send a messenger in and say you'd like to make a peace deal? What do you think you'd do? I mean, it looks like you're going to win. So surely, launching a big attack might work. Or do you just make a peace deal? Or do you watch the city gates as you're trying to make sure Charles doesn't escape? What do we think? Well, the answer is you send your people to watch the city gate. So they didn't storm Oxford. They were really wise. I would choose that if I didn't know what they did. But they didn't. They kept tight control. They just surrounded Oxford. They watch for any escape attempts. Eventually, Charles I knows he's not going to be able to escape. They're completely surrounded. King Charles then surrenders and the war is over. So that's really how the English Civil War pans out. So it starts off with no real clear winner. But Oliver Cromwell, who we're going to look at more next week, Oliver Cromwell obviously decides, gosh, I don't know if you can hear that plane going over. It's going to make my doggy woof. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but a big fighter jet's just gone over, I think. So there's no real decisive battle at the beginning. They're all sort of fighting, no clear winner. Oliver Cromwell creates this new model army. They're very wise, they're very clever. They make some really tactical decisions. And Charles I has lost. Now, I'm going to finish off. We're going to look at this at the beginning of next week. But I'm going to finish off by thinking the next activity is, what could you do with Charles I? Now, some of you might know what they did with him, but actually it wasn't a done deal of what happened to him. There were lots of discussions. It took a long time to decide what on earth are we going to do with him. And there are a variety of things. The first thing is you could just make peace. You could forgive him and you could allow him back to be the king. You could negotiate a new agreement and say your power has to be limited and that Parliament has the final say. You could remove him from power, no longer have a royal family, and send him into exile, which means you send him abroad to another country and tell him he's banned from living in England. You could execute him because then, peace will definitely be assured because he can't actually mount a second attack on you. Or you could just do nothing and let God decide, because after all, he has been chosen by God to be the king. So what I want you to do is think about all the pros and cons for each of these decisions. So let's go for number one, making peace and forgiving him and allowing him to be king. That's quite noble. That's quite a nice thing to do. We all make mistakes. But the downside to that would be, what do we think? You could try and negotiate a new government and make Parliament have the final say. Again, that seems pretty fair, but what might the negatives of that one be? You could just remove him from power and exile him abroad. Again, I think that's probably the least of my favourite ideas, because you could mount an attack with foreign troops. Execute him. Bit of a tricky one, because do you have the right to execute a king? I mean, he's been chosen by God. Or do nothing and let God decide what happens? But that kind of makes the whole war seem a little bit pointless if you're going to do number 5. So I want you to have a little think. We're going to come back to this slide at the beginning of next week. And we're going to think about what to do with Charles I. And I want you to think about the pros and cons for each of these 5 ideas. And then we're going to talk about what they did. And we're going to talk about Oliver Cromwell and whether or not he was a great person, or whether actually he possibly wasn't. He was a usurper. We're going to look at what usurper means next week. So that's your kind of idea of what I'd like you to do over this week, is think about all the pros and cons of what they could do with Charles I. And also think about what you would want if you were living in the time. If you had fought for Parliament, and maybe some of your family had died, what would you want to happen to the king? Maybe you fought for the king and you really believed that he was chosen by God, and you didn't want, you didn't really feel like, Parliament should have got involved and created this war. What would you think that should happen to Charles? So that's your kind of work, I suppose, your thinking work over the next week. The other thing to say is there's lots of activities that you can do over on the Time Explorers, the English Civil War blog. So do go check it out. And I will see you next week, where we're going to think about what happened to Charles, and also look at Oliver Cromwell. So have a lovely, lovely week, and I'll see you soon.